And with voters looking ahead to primaries and presidential candidates already hitting the campaign trail, one former Senate candidate is asking, why do we let political parties act like monopolies? Joining us now is David Dodson, former U.S. Senate candidate from Wyoming and business lecturer at Stanford. David, great to have you on Cheddar Business. Thanks for joining us.
Always love to be here.
So what were some of the challenges that you faced running against an incumbent? How did that lead you to really agree that these political parties are acting like monopolies?
So I sort of naively thought I'd have a fair fight. I was running in the primary against John Barrasso as a Republican. And I thought, well, the best man wins, right? It doesn't work that way. The Republican Party was very specific that they were not going to let me win. And it was everything from the debate formats to not letting me speak at certain events to restricting funding. And the way I described it in my New York Times article is they laid out 1,000 little bear traps there. For example, the best story was when I tried to find a law firm. I couldn't find a law firm because every law firm that works for Republicans said, I can't do business with you because if I do business with you, I'll be blackballed, which, by the way, is what AOC sort of outed on the Democratic side. It works on both sides. I mean, when you have a situation where 88% of the House districts are not competitive in the general election, only in the primary, and you allow the individual party to run the primary system, that's not the thumb on the scale. That's having your foot on the scale. Imagine this. Imagine if in the general election, for the presidential election, we let the incumbent set the rules. Donald Trump, the Republican, gets to set the rules in the general election. We would find that absurd, right? But that's what happens in 88% of the primaries. If it's a Democratic seat, we say, well, we'll let the Democratic Party run the primary system. And both parties have been very specific that their job, both financially and organizationally, is to protect incumbents. That's not allowing the voters to make the decision.
Let's talk about the 2020 race, David. It's interesting to your point, right? This is obviously going to be a series of primaries leading up to whomever the Democratic candidate ultimately is. 23 people with their name in the running, at least for now, but yet it's been interesting talking about an incumbency that Joe Biden basically has gotten all of the attention. Yes, the fundraising dollars are there to back it. Yes, the poll numbers. Yes, the media is covering him. But what about your own lessons here? And this op-ed can be applied to how we look at the Democratic field running for president.
The Republican Party is making sure that only one person and only one person is served up to the Republican primary voters. That's Donald Trump. So there's no such thing as a Republican primary this year. On the Democratic side, because it's an open seat, and that's why one of the things I think we have to have are term limits, we have, 24 people running side by side. And yes, Joe Biden was more well known, but everybody knows who Bernie Sanders is. Everybody knows who Elizabeth Warren is. I mean, that's a fair fight, and the best person will probably emerge, or at least the person that the Democratic voters want to represent them. On the Republican side, we don't even have a fight.
What's the solution to the problem that you highlighted in your op-ed, David? Is it term limits in the Senate?
Well, the umbrella over all of this is that we have to return the power of the ballot box to the voters. Right now, the voters have been disenfranchised. So there's three simple things. One is you have to end partisan gerrymandering. Now, that's for two reasons. One, by creating these safe districts, you force congressmen and congresswomen to move to either side. That's why we don't get anything done in Congress, because it's so divisive now. You're either far left or far right. The other reason you have to end gerrymandering is this. Gerrymandering is not just about creating a safe district for you. It's about grabbing people, voters from the other party and shoving them into a district that is already dominant by one party to make sure their vote counts. Now, pause on that. Where else in the United States history have we had times when we've said certain people's vote doesn't count? We're not going to let certain people vote. That's exactly the fundamentals of gerrymandering. We used to do that with a baseball bat or a club. Now we do it with computers to make sure certain people's vote doesn't count. That's the first thing. The second thing is term limits. You only have to look at open seats, whether it's a Senate race, a governor race, a presidential race, to see that open seats are where you have competition. Closed seats, the incumbent just sails right through. AOC is a phenomenon because she's a phenomenon. That hardly ever happens. And the last is we have to wrest control of the primary system from the parties and give it to nonpartisan commissions. We cannot let the individual party be also the referee and the rule maker.
What should term limits be, and should they be different in the House and in the Senate?
Yeah, 2 terms for the Senate, 12 years. That's a lot of time. 5 terms in the House, 10 years. That's a lot of time. And this argument is sometimes made that, well, you don't have enough experience there. That's a tremendous amount of experience. And most senators, for example, are former governors, they're former state treasurers, they're former congressmen. These are people with experience in government. But here's the main reason why you have to have term limits. 80% of Americans want term limits. That is our government. It's not theirs. And we have this nanny state happening in Washington, D.C., where they're saying, no, we know what's best, okay? Even though 80% of Americans want term limits, we're going to resist term limits. It's our ballot box. We deserve to be able to say who we're represented. And by the way, part of the reason why they're saying we shouldn't have term limits is we have things under control. Well, my goodness, you only have to look at what's happening in Washington, D.C. to say they don't have things under control.
So, David, do you foresee this being something that lawmakers can address, that term limits are a real tangible thing we as voters may get sometime in the near future?
Oh, no, we have to do it ourselves. Okay, there's two ways to change it has to be the Constitution. There's two ways to change the Constitution. One is Washington, D.C. writes the amendment and it goes down to the states. The other way, it comes from the people back up. We've only done it once that way. That's how we have to do it. And by the way, we say, oh, constitutional amendment, that sounds so dramatic. Keep in mind that of the last 12 constitutional amendments, 9 of them have all been around voting in elections. Its constitutional amendment is the reason why people who are 18 years can vote. It's the reason why women can vote. It's the reason why people of color can vote. It's the reason why there's no poll tax. We have routinely used constitutional amendments to make sure that we have that bond between us, the voters, and Washington, D.C. We just need to exert it. That's why James Madison put it in there.
David Dodson, former U.S. Senate candidate from Wyoming, also business lecturer at Stanford. Thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.